Your soulmate just discovered that the marriage they were pushed into was never simply about love, timing, or fate. Someone had been quietly controlling the story from behind the scenes, feeding them fears, twisting your intentions, and convincing them that choosing you would destroy everything they had worked for. But now the truth has surfaced, and the person responsible can no longer hide. What your soulmate learned has shaken their marriage, their family, and everything they believed about why the two of you were separated. Listen carefully. Because this revelation did not begin with a confession. It began with one small contradiction your soulmate could no longer ignore. For years, they had been told that you were the reason everything fell apart. They were told you had moved on, that you had stopped fighting, that you would eventually hurt them, and that marrying someone else was the only responsible choice left. Every time they questioned that story, someone close to them immediately reminded them of the same painful warnings. And eventually, your soulmate surrendered. Not because their heart stopped loving you. Not because another person suddenly became more important. They surrendered because they believed they were protecting everyone around them from a disaster that would supposedly happen if they chose you. But recently, something changed. Your soulmate came across information that was never supposed to reach them. A conversation from years ago resurfaced, and one sentence exposed a lie so specific that it forced them to investigate everything. They started comparing dates. They remembered conversations. They questioned why certain messages from you never reached them. They wondered why every attempt they made to reconnect with you was followed by another family crisis, another warning, another reason they were told to stay away. Then they discovered the connection. The same person who had constantly warned your soulmate against you was also the person privately communicating with others to make sure the separation remained permanent. Your soulmate felt sick. Because suddenly, memories that had confused them for years began making sense. That unexpected argument before the engagement. That message they thought you ignored. That sudden pressure to announce another relationship. That family member who insisted, you need to move on immediately. None of it looked accidental anymore. Your soulmate confronted the person responsible. At first, they denied everything. They called it a misunderstanding. They said they had only been trying to protect your soulmate. They claimed they never intended to destroy anything between you. But your soulmate had proof. And when that proof was placed in front of them, the excuses stopped. The truth was devastating. This person admitted they were afraid of what would happen if your soulmate chose you. They believed your connection was becoming too strong. They feared losing influence over your soulmate's decisions. They feared family plans would change. They feared your soulmate might finally choose their own happiness instead of continuing to obey everyone else's expectations. So they interfered. Quietly. Repeatedly. They exaggerated problems between you. They hid important information. They created misunderstandings at the exact moments when you and your soulmate were closest to repairing things. And when another marriage opportunity appeared, they pushed harder than ever. Your soulmate was told, this is your chance to finally have stability. But now they understand what those words really meant. It was never about giving them stability. It was about making sure there was no path back to you. Your soulmate asked one question that made the entire room go silent. If you believed this marriage was truly right for me, why did you have to lie about the person I actually loved? Nobody had an answer. And for the first time, your soulmate stopped defending the decisions they had made. They admitted something painful. They said they had spent years trying to convince themselves that marrying someone else was proof that they had moved on. They smiled when people expected them to smile. They accepted congratulations. They tried to build a future while burying the questions they still carried about you. But discovering this truth destroyed the explanation they had been using to survive. Because now they know you did not abandon them the way they were told. You did not simply stop caring. And the separation they once believed was inevitable may have been deliberately engineered. Your soulmate is angry, but beneath that anger is something even heavier. Regret. They keep thinking about how differently everything might have happened if they had known the truth earlier. They are replaying the moment they chose another marriage. They are remembering your words, your silence, your pain. And now they understand that while they believed they were walking away because there was no future left between you, someone else had been quietly making sure they never saw the future that was still possible. But there is one final detail your soulmate has not processed yet. Because during that confrontation, the exposed person revealed that they were not acting alone. There was someone else involved. Someone your soulmate trusted even more. And when that second name was finally spoken, your soulmate stood completely frozen, because this person had been standing beside them throughout the entire marriage, pretending they knew absolutely nothing. The moment that second name was spoken, your soulmate stopped breathing for a few seconds. Because this was not some distant relative. Not an outsider. Not someone they had always suspected. This was someone who had sat beside them during their lowest moments, listened while they cried about you, and repeatedly told them that walking away from you was the only way to save their future. And now your soulmate was learning that this same person had quietly helped destroy the very relationship they pretended to mourn. The betrayal cut deeper than the original lie. Your soulmate demanded to know everything. No more half-truths. No more excuses. No more carefully edited versions of what happened. And slowly, the real story began coming out. Years ago, when your soulmate was still emotionally connected to you, there had been serious concern inside the family that they were becoming impossible to control. They were beginning to question expectations. They were beginning to make decisions without asking permission. And most importantly, they were beginning to imagine a future where you stood beside them. That frightened certain people more than your soulmate ever realized. Because your presence represented change. If your soulmate chose you, old family arrangements could fall apart. Promises that had already been made behind closed doors could be broken. Money, reputation, social expectations, and family loyalty were all tied together in ways your soulmate had never been allowed to see. Then came the revelation that completely changed everything. Another marriage had been discussed long before your soulmate believed it had. While your soulmate was still hoping to repair things with you, certain people were already speaking privately about moving them towards someone else. Meetings happened without their knowledge. Conversations happened behind their back. And whenever your soulmate tried to bring up your name, someone immediately created another reason why you supposedly could not be trusted. Your soulmate suddenly remembered one particular night. They had received a message that made them believe you no longer wanted anything to do with them. That message broke something inside them. It was one of the main reasons they finally stopped reaching out. But now the person sitting across from them admitted something horrifying. That message had not told the full truth. Information had been removed. Words had been repeated out of context. Your soulmate had made one of the biggest decisions of their life based on a version of reality someone else had manufactured. Their voice started shaking. They asked, "Did you ever know what I was being told?" Nobody answered immediately. And that silence told your soulmate more than any confession could. They realized you may have spent years believing they willingly replaced you, while they spent those same years believing you willingly gave them up. Two people carrying completely different versions of the same heartbreak. And someone in the middle knew exactly what they were doing. Your soulmate could no longer contain their anger. They stood up and said, "You watched me suffer. You watched me question myself. You watched me enter another marriage while knowing I was making that decision based on lies." The exposed person tried to defend themselves again. They claimed the other marriage looked safer, more acceptable, more stable. They said everyone believed your soulmate would eventually forget you. But that sentence only made things worse. Because your soulmate quietly replied, "I never did." The room went silent. For the first time, they admitted it without hiding behind pride. Without pretending it was only nostalgia. Without pretending the memories meant nothing. They never completely stopped loving you. They simply learned how to live while convincing themselves that loving you no longer mattered. But now it mattered more than ever. Because the truth had forced your soulmate to confront a terrifying possibility. What if the life they were told was impossible with you was never impossible at all? What if the biggest obstacle was not fate? What if it was manipulation? Your soulmate went back through old conversations, old dates, old family arguments, and everything surrounding the period when the other marriage was arranged. And another pattern emerged. Every time you and your soulmate moved closer to reconciliation, something suddenly happened. A rumor. A warning. An emergency. A family confrontation. A mysterious piece of information. Something always appeared at exactly the right moment to pull your soulmate away again. That was when they understood this was not one mistake. It was a campaign. A carefully repeated effort to exhaust the connection until both of you eventually believed there was nothing left to save. But whoever planned it underestimated one thing. Truth has a way of surviving longer than manipulation. And now your soulmate was holding enough pieces to see the entire picture. They confronted the second person directly. This time there was no denial. The person broke down. They admitted that pressure had come from someone older in the family. Someone whose approval carried enormous weight. Your soulmate immediately asked why. Why was separating the two of you so important? Why did so many people care who they loved? The answer was something your soulmate never expected. There had been a promise made years earlier. A promise involving the family your soulmate eventually married into. And that promise existed before your soulmate was ever told they had a choice. Suddenly, this was bigger than jealousy. Bigger than one controlling person. Bigger than a misunderstanding. Your soulmate began realizing that their decision to marry someone else may have been guided toward a destination that had already been chosen for them. And when they finally asked who made that original promise, everyone avoided eye contact. Until one elderly family member quietly said, "You deserve to know what was agreed before you ever met you." Your soulmate froze. Because what came next was not only about their marriage. It was about the exact reason you had been seen as a threat from the very beginning. And once your soulmate heard that reason, they finally understood why certain people had worked so desperately to erase you from their future. The elderly family member lowered their eyes before speaking, almost as if they had carried this secret for far too many years. Then came the truth your soulmate had never been prepared to hear. The marriage they were pushed toward had not begun with love. It had begun with an agreement. Years earlier, two families had made a private promise involving reputation, financial security, and a future connection they believed would benefit everyone around them. Your soulmate had never been told. They were allowed to believe every major choice was naturally unfolding. But the moment you entered their life, that old arrangement became threatened. Because your soulmate was no longer willing to accept the future other people had quietly imagined for them. They wanted you. And the stronger their feelings became, the more frightened certain people grew. Your soulmate stared across the room in disbelief. So all those warnings about you were because I was ruining a plan? Nobody answered. That silence was enough. Suddenly, years of confusion turned into rage. Your soulmate remembered being told you were not reliable enough. That you would eventually disappear. That the relationship would damage the family. That choosing you would create consequences they would regret forever. But now they understood something devastating. Many of those warnings had never been about your character, they were about protecting an agreement. Your soulmate's voice became cold. You made me believe the person I loved was dangerous because you were afraid I would choose them over your plans. One person began crying. Another tried to explain that things were different back then. They insisted they believed they were protecting your soulmate's future. But your soulmate was finished accepting that excuse. Protecting me would have meant telling me the truth. Those words silenced everyone. Because there was no defense against them. Then your soulmate asked the question that had been growing inside them since the first confession. What exactly did you do to make sure you and I never found our way back to each other? The elderly relative hesitated. And that hesitation terrified your soulmate. Because it meant there was still more. Finally, another confession came. There had been a time when you tried to reach your soulmate after the separation. Not once. Several times. But your soulmate never knew. A message had been intercepted. Another had been dismissed as something you supposedly sent out of guilt. And one attempt to reconnect had been deliberately kept from your soulmate altogether. Your soulmate's eyes filled with tears. For years, they had carried the belief that you never came back. That if you had truly loved them, you would have fought harder. And now they were discovering that perhaps you did. Someone simply made sure they never saw it. Your soulmate whispered, "You let me believe I meant nothing to them. Nobody could look at them." That was the moment their anger finally broke into grief. Because anger could not protect them from the thought of what you may have gone through. They imagined you waiting for an answer that never arrived. Trying to understand why they suddenly became unreachable. Perhaps believing they had chosen someone else without caring what it did to you. And your soulmate realized both of you may have been grieving the same connection while believing the other person had willingly abandoned it. They covered their face. Everything became too much. The marriage. The manipulation. The lost years. The unanswered questions. The possibility that an entire love story had been destroyed not because two people stopped loving each other, but because other people decided that love was inconvenient. Then something unexpected happened. The person originally exposed walked back into the room carrying an old envelope. They had kept it hidden for years. Your soulmate immediately recognized the handwriting. It was yours. Their hands began shaking before they even touched it. The envelope had never been opened. Never given to them. Never mentioned. Your soulmate stared at the date written on the front. It had been sent only days before they agreed to move forward with the other marriage. Everything inside them collapsed. Because now they knew that while they were being told you had disappeared forever, you had been trying to reach them. Your soulmate slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. They began reading. And before they reached the middle, tears were already falling onto the page. Because the words proved something nobody in that room could deny. You had not walked away. You had not forgotten them. You had been asking for one final chance to speak before they made a decision that could change both of your lives forever. Your soulmate turned toward the family. You knew about this? One person nodded. That single nod shattered whatever trust remained. Your soulmate stood up and said, "Then you didn't just push me into another marriage. You took away my chance to choose with the truth in front of me." Nobody tried to stop them as they walked out. For the first time, your soulmate was no longer asking their family what they should do. They were asking themselves what they wanted. And the answer frightened them because it came immediately. They wanted to know what became of you. They wanted to know whether you still carried unanswered questions. They wanted to know whether there was anything left between you that manipulation had failed to destroy. But before your soulmate could decide what to do next, they discovered one final piece hidden inside the envelope. A second folded page. This one was not written by you. It contained a name, a date, and evidence showing exactly who ordered your last message to be hidden. When your soulmate saw that name, they went completely still. Because the person responsible was someone they had trusted with their marriage from the very beginning. And this time, your soulmate was not going to confront them privately. They were going to expose everything in front of the entire family. Your soulmate walked back into that room with the second page still trembling in their hand. This time, they were not crying. They were not confused. They were not asking anyone to explain. They already knew enough. Everyone immediately noticed the change in their face. The person whose name appeared on that page was sitting only a few feet away. Someone who had been present during the engagement discussions. Someone who had encouraged the marriage. Someone who had repeatedly told your soulmate that you were gone forever. And someone who had looked directly into their eyes for years while hiding the truth. Your soulmate placed the paper on the table. Then they said one sentence that changed the atmosphere completely. I know who stopped the letter. Nobody moved. The exposed person tried to stand up and leave. Your soulmate stopped them. No. You have walked away from the truth long enough. Tonight, everyone is going to hear what you did. The room became painfully quiet. Your soulmate began reading the details from the page: dates, names, conversations, instructions, and finally, proof that your attempt to reconnect had been intentionally blocked because certain people were afraid your soulmate would cancel the other marriage if they heard from you. That was the real reason. They knew your soulmate still loved you. They knew one conversation could destroy everything they had arranged. So they made sure that conversation never happened. The person finally broke. They admitted it. They said they had believed the other marriage was better for the family. They believed your soulmate would eventually forgive them once enough time passed. They thought feelings for you would fade. But your soulmate interrupted them. You didn't give me time to forget. You gave me a lie to live inside. No one had an answer. Then came the confession that hurt more than everything else. The exposed person admitted they had seen your letter before hiding it. They knew exactly what you had written. They knew you were not begging. You were simply asking for honesty. One conversation. One chance for your soulmate to decide after hearing the truth. And they denied both of you that chance. Your soulmate's eyes filled with tears again, but this time, those tears were different. They were not tears of helplessness. They were tears of awakening. Because for the first time, your soulmate understood that the pain they had carried for years did not come from being unloved by you. It came from being denied the truth. They looked around the room and said, "Every one of you who knew and stayed silent helped make this happen." Several people lowered their heads. One person began apologizing. Another tried to explain that they had been afraid to challenge the family. But apologies could not return the years that had been lost. Your soulmate knew that. And that realization changed something inside them forever. They were finished living by fear. Finished protecting people who had never protected their heart. Finished pretending their marriage decision had been completely their own when they now knew how much pressure, manipulation, and deception had surrounded it. Then someone asked the question everyone was thinking. What are you going to do now? Your soulmate looked down at your old letter. For a long moment, they said nothing. Then quietly, "I am going to stop making decisions based on what everyone else wants." That sentence marked the end of an entire chapter. They were not promising to destroy lives overnight. They were not acting out of revenge. They were finally choosing truth. And truth required difficult conversations. Your soulmate knew their current marriage could no longer continue pretending nothing had changed. The foundation had been shaken. Questions that had been buried were now impossible to ignore. They knew the person they married also deserved honesty about what had been revealed. No more pretending. No more emotional hiding. No more allowing other people to control what happened next. But there was one thing your soulmate needed to do before anything else. They needed to find you. Not to make impossible promises. Not to demand that you reopen a wound. Not to assume you were still waiting. They simply needed to tell you the truth you should have heard years ago. They wanted to tell you, "I thought you abandoned me. I thought you stopped trying. I thought choosing another path was the only future left. And now I know I was wrong." That night, your soulmate went home carrying the letter. They read it again. Then again. Every sentence brought another memory back. Your voice. Your patience. The moments when you tried to warn them that something was happening behind the scenes. At the time, they had been too overwhelmed to believe it. Now they understood. And for perhaps the first time in years, your soulmate allowed themselves to say your name without immediately forcing the feeling away. The emotion was still there. Buried beneath disappointment. Buried beneath time. Buried beneath a life built after you. But still there. And that scared them. Because some truths change what you know. Others change what you can no longer tolerate. This truth did both. Your soulmate may not yet know exactly what tomorrow will look like. They may have complicated decisions ahead. There may be conversations that hurt. There may be consequences no one can avoid. But one thing is certain now. The person who manipulated the separation has been exposed. The lie that carried your soulmate into another marriage has finally collapsed. And you are no longer the villain in the story they were taught to believe. For years, your soulmate thought losing you was proof that the love between you had failed. Now they understand the love may never have been given a fair chance. That realization will not disappear tomorrow. It will not be silenced by family pressure again. It will not fit quietly back inside the old story. Because once a person discovers that their heartbreak was built on deception, they cannot return to believing the deception just because the truth is inconvenient. Your soulmate has finally reached that point. They are no longer asking who will approve. They are no longer asking who will be angry. They are asking the question they should have been allowed to ask years ago. What would I have chosen if nobody had lied to me? And deep inside, they already know the answer. It was you. Maybe the years cannot be returned. Maybe some damage cannot be erased. But the truth has finally returned your name to the place from which others tried to remove it. And whether your paths reconnect or simply find closure, one thing will never be stolen again. Your soulmate now knows you did not abandon them. They know someone deliberately stood between you. They know another marriage was pushed forward while the truth was kept hidden. And most importantly, they finally know that what they felt for you was never the mistake. The mistake was trusting the people who convinced them that it was. Now the lies are over. The person behind them has been exposed. And now your soulmate is sitting with a truth they can no longer push away. For years, they believed the distance between you happened because something between you had simply failed. They believed maybe the timing was wrong. Maybe the connection was not strong enough. Maybe you had stopped caring. But now they know that was never the full story. Someone carefully created fear where there should have been trust. Someone placed doubt where there should have been a conversation. And someone pushed another marriage forward because they were terrified of what might happen if your soulmate was finally allowed to choose freely. That truth has changed everything inside them. They are looking back at every moment they blamed you. Every night they wondered why you never came back. Every time they told themselves they had no choice but to move forward. And now they realize that you may have been waiting for an answer they were never allowed to give. That is the part hurting them the most. Because your soulmate now understands that both of you may have suffered because of the same lie. You thought they chose someone else without looking back. They thought you disappeared without fighting for them. And the people responsible watched both sides believe it. But that story has finally collapsed. Your soulmate knows your silence was not the whole truth. They know your love was not the problem. They know the connection between you was deliberately weakened until it became easier to push them toward another future. And now there is no way for them to pretend they do not know. The marriage they entered may still carry responsibilities, memories, and consequences that cannot be erased overnight. Your soulmate understands that. They are not rushing blindly. They are not trying to destroy everything in one emotional moment. but something inside them has permanently changed. They will never again allow the same people to decide what their heart is allowed to feel. They will never again accept a story simply because the entire family repeats it. And they will never again hear your name and immediately associate it with abandonment. Because now your name represents something completely different. It represents the truth they were denied. The choice they were never fully allowed to make. And the love story someone worked desperately to bury. Your soulmate keeps asking themselves one question. If I had received that letter, if I had known everything, would I still have gone through with that marriage? And every time the question returns, the answer becomes harder to ignore. No. They would have stopped. They would have asked questions. They would have searched for you. They would have demanded the truth before making a permanent decision. And that realization is breaking their heart. Not because they can magically return to the past, but because they finally understand how different the future could have been. Still, the truth did not arrive for nothing. It arrived because your soulmate needed to stop carrying anger toward the wrong person. They needed to know you were not the one who destroyed everything. They needed to know somebody else interfered. And now that person has finally been exposed. The excuses are finished. The hidden agreements are exposed. The intercepted messages are known. And the lies that protected this secret for years can no longer survive. Your soulmate does not know exactly where this truth will lead. But they know one thing with complete certainty. From this point forward, nobody else will decide how they feel about you. Nobody else will speak on your behalf. Nobody else will convince them that walking away is the only option without giving them the truth first. And if your soulmate ever stands before you again, there is something they desperately want you to understand. They never forgot you as easily as everyone wanted you to believe. They never stopped wondering. They never completely stopped loving. They were simply taught to believe there was nothing left to fight for. Now they know there was. And perhaps the most painful truth of all is this. If nobody had interfered, if nobody had hidden your words, if nobody had forced fear into their heart, your soulmate already knows who they would have chosen. You. Not because someone told them to. Not because they feel guilty. But because beneath every lie, every year, and every forced decision, their heart had already made that choice long ago.